Sometimes, the greatest stories are not found in the spotlight, on the stage, or even in the pages of a screenplay. Sometimes they unfold quietly, without any dramatic music or emotional speeches, just a long, steady path of choices that eventually lead to one final moment. And in the case of Meryl Streep, an actress known for depth, discipline, and a unique calmness, the story of the fortune she leaves behind becomes less about riches and more about the strangely ordinary journey that led to them. Today's video takes a slow, steady walk through that story. Nothing surprising, nothing flashy, just a long explanation of how everything came to be. Part 1. The story begins in the most unexciting way possible. Meryl Streep, over the course of multiple decades, completed projects, film roles, stage work, voice performances, guest appearances that accumulated financial returns. This accumulation did not happen suddenly, nor did it involve any particularly dramatic financial decision. Instead, it occurred through a series of consistent, stable actions. She accepted roles, fulfilled contracts, collected earnings, paid taxes, and placed a portion of her income into thoroughly standard investment options. Over time, these investments performed at a predictable pace, neither impressively high nor disappointingly low. The result, after many years, was a sizable amount of wealth built through methods that could be described as steady, structured, and even somewhat monotonous. Her family, observing her work across decades, never paid much attention to the financial details. Their focus, naturally, was on her life, her presence, and the roles that shaped her career. They saw her achievements, the awards, the nominations, the long list of characters she portrayed. In contrast, the paperwork, financial statements, and subtle numerical growth of her assets were never topics of conversation at family gatherings. Instead, they were stored in organized folders, digital spreadsheets, and occasionally in a filing cabinet that remained closed for long stretches of time. Despite her status in the entertainment world, Meryl lived with a sense of measured pacing. Her approach to wealth mirrored her approach to work, methodical, controlled, and uninterested in extremes. She purchased property only when necessary, avoided overly risky ventures, and rarely discussed finances in interviews. Even when industry publications speculated about earnings or net worth, she maintained the same quiet neutrality, neither confirming nor denying anything. In many ways, the quietness of her financial life became one of its most defining characteristics. The fortune she eventually left behind was not the result of extraordinary business ventures or shocking deals. Instead, it was built through a cumulative effect, one film, 1 year, one project at a time. This slow-growing foundation allowed her wealth to expand steadily without any need for dramatic ups and downs. By the time her estate planning documents were finalized, the total value had grown into something significant enough to require organized distribution. Her family never expected the exact amount. They were aware that she had been successful, but they associated success with artistic recognition rather than financial numbers. They remembered performances more than box office returns. They remembered rehearsals, script readings, and film sets, not investment portfolios or asset management strategies. So, when the time came for the details to be read, the process became unexpectedly emotional, not because of any shocking revelations, but because the fortune represented the slow, quiet accumulation of an entire lifetime's effort.
To understand how this fortune came together, one must go back to the earlier stages of her career. During those initial years, she accepted roles that aligned with her artistic goals, rather than focusing on financial gain. But even these roles, modestly compensated in comparison to later projects, played a part in forming the early foundation of her earnings. The income from these roles, although not extraordinary, contributed to her ability to make responsible financial decisions at an early stage. She saved a portion, invested a portion, and maintained a modest lifestyle that allowed her to gradually build stability. As time progressed and her career expanded, the financial returns increased, but her habits did not change dramatically. She continued living with intention, choosing roles based on their creative value rather than their monetary appeal. Nevertheless, a steady income continued to flow, year after year. adding to what would eventually become a substantial estate. Her family, over the years, developed an understanding of her personality that extended far beyond financial considerations. They appreciated her for her temperament, her calmness, and her attention to detail. They saw her as a person who valued structure and predictability. And so the idea that she would leave behind a carefully organized fortune was consistent with everything they knew about her. The day the estate details were finally explained to them, the room was filled with a slow, quiet sense of reflection rather than excitement. They reviewed documents, numbers, and allocations. They observed how each section of her estate plan had been arranged with methodical precision. The more they read, the clearer it became that the fortune represented not just wealth, but the sum of decades of discipline and intention. Their emotional reaction did not arise from the amount itself, but from the realization that every dollar had been earned through years of steady effort. They imagined the countless hours on film sets, long days of rehearsals, and the balanced lifestyle she maintained throughout her career. It was this understanding, the recognition of a lifetime's work, that brought tears to their eyes. Her fortune became a symbol of everything she had built, not only professionally, but personally. The first part of this story concludes by focusing on the simple truth. Her wealth did not come from sudden success or dramatic financial strategies. It came from consistency, from decisions made thoughtfully, from a long, steady walk through a career that evolved naturally, piece by piece. And as her family sat there absorbing the full picture, they realized they were not crying because of money. They were crying because of the steady, quiet life that money represented.
The narrative continues with a steady, unhurried examination of how Meryl Streep's financial legacy expanded through the middle years of her career. Years defined not by sudden dramatic twists, but by the kind of uneventful, predictable progress that feels almost deliberately uneventful. During this period, she continued working on films, stage projects, and other commitments with the same measured professionalism that had defined her earlier life. Nothing remarkable occurred in terms of unconventional financial dealings. Instead, her income followed a consistent pattern connected directly to her workload. During these years, her approach to managing money remained largely unchanged. She continued distributing her earnings into a variety of stable, familiar financial channels. These included retirement accounts, long-term investment funds, modest real estate purchases, and periodic contributions to well-established organizations. Each choice was made with the intention of maintaining stability rather than pursuing unusual opportunities. The consistency of these decisions, while unexciting, formed the backbone of her future estate. Her family, while aware of her ongoing success, did not monitor these developments closely. They observed her life through the lens of personal moments, family events, milestones, and everyday interactions. While the entertainment world saw her as a remarkable figure, her family saw her as someone who simply went to work, returned home, and continued the quiet rhythm of her routine. The financial aspect of her career, though substantial, remained outside their conversations. As the years progressed, her portfolio grew gradually. There were no abrupt spikes or unpredictable changes. Instead, the growth resembled a slow, steady incline. The uneventful nature of this progress meant that her wealth expanded almost invisibly. For her, this was preferable. She valued a lifestyle that avoided unnecessary attention, and her financial habits aligned with that preference. In the background, her estate plan evolved at a similar pace. Early drafts were created, reviewed, and revised in small increments. Legal professionals helped her shape the structure of these documents, ensuring they reflected her intentions with accuracy. She made slow, careful adjustments rather than sweeping changes. This deliberate approach resulted in a plan that, although simple in its logic, became increasingly detailed over time. Her family remained unaware of these revisions. They saw her as organized, yes, but did not assume the extent of planning she was undertaking. They assumed she had arranged a few standard documents, as many individuals do, without imagining the thoroughness behind them.
Meryl, however, approached the process with the same precision she brought to her performances: methodical, quiet, and unwaveringly patient. When she entered the later stages of her career, her earnings continued at a stable pace. Some years were more financially productive than others, but the overall trajectory remained predictable. She continued to take on roles not because of their financial reward, but because they aligned with her artistic interests. Yet each role added another increment to her wealth, and each increment contributed to the larger structure that was forming behind
Her
the scenes.
properties, while not numerous, were maintained carefully. She avoided impulsive purchases and preferred investments that held long-term value. Over time, even these modest decisions generated a steady increase in her net worth. Real estate markets shifted gradually, and her properties appreciated at a pace similar to her career, a pace marked by consistency instead of volatility. Her philanthropic habits also expanded during this time. She made contributions to organizations she believed in, choosing causes that aligned with her values. These contributions, while generous, were also strategically planned. She ensured they fit into the broader framework of her financial picture, allowing her to support important initiatives without disrupting the overall structure of her estate. This balanced approach ensured that her wealth continued to grow even as she gave portions of it away. Through all of this, the emotional dimension remained hidden. Her family continued to see her life in terms of ordinary interactions. They admired her discipline, but they did not consider how deeply that discipline extended into areas such as estate planning. They experienced her as a presence, steady, warm, thoughtful, but never as someone preoccupied with building a financial legacy. The significance of her planning became more evident as she aged. Her documents became increasingly thorough, outlining each detail with clarity. She arranged the distribution of her assets not only in terms of monetary value, but in terms of personal meaning. Some items were allocated because they represented sentimental memories. Others were assigned based on practicality or long-term usefulness. In each case, the decisions were made slowly, without drama, and with a level of calm deliberation that characterized her entire adult life. This quiet structure continued to grow behind the scenes, unnoticed by her loved ones. They knew she was responsible, but they did not anticipate the magnitude of the legacy she was assembling. They did not track the incremental growth of her investments or the patient accumulation of her savings. They simply saw her living her life, working on projects, and maintaining the steady rhythm that defined her. When the time eventually arrived for her estate to be formally reviewed, the process revealed the full extent of this long-term planning. The fortune she left behind did not appear suddenly. It did not shock because of its origin, but because of how silently it had grown. Her family, who had not expected such an outcome, found themselves confronted with results of decades of consistency. The emotional impact came from the contrast between the quietness of her daily life and the depth of the legacy she constructed. They realized that every subtle, unnoticed choice had contributed to this final outcome. They saw how her discipline, her stability, and her understated approach had formed something substantial, something that reflected her values more than her earnings. The reaction, once again, centered not on the amount itself, but on the meaning behind it. They saw the fortune as the result of a lifetime defined by reliability, hard work, and intention. They understood that she had built it not for attention, but for the quiet purpose of leaving them with support and security. It was the realization of this intention, not the wealth, that brought a slow, steady wave of emotion over them. Part 2 ends with an acknowledgement of the central theme. The fortune she built was not dramatic, surprising, or unpredictable. It was the natural result of a life lived in alignment with quiet principles. And it is this quietness, this steady progression, that ultimately brought her family.
As the discussion around Meryl Streep's estate continued, her family found themselves slowly moving through a series of documents that were organized with an almost predictable neatness. Nothing about the layout seemed dramatic or unexpected. There were no sudden shifts, no unusual clauses that might cause confusion. Instead, the structure of her estate reflected the same quiet, deliberate composure she had displayed throughout her life and career. The pages were formatted clearly, with headings and subheadings, consistent margins, and a distinct absence of anything that might cause distraction. This simplicity, however, made the experience strangely emotional in its own understated way. The legal advisor, a calm and steady individual who had worked with Meryl for many years, explained each section without adding unnecessary emphasis. His tone matched the nature of the documents, measured, stable, and free of dramatization. He pointed out the various allocations, each one established years earlier and updated with minor adjustments when needed. Meryl had approached estate planning with the same quiet diligence she used in selecting roles and managing her public presence. Everything was prepared long before it was required. Her family listened attentively, absorbing not just the information but the personality that seemed embedded within it. Every clause, every footnote, and every decision reflected her thoughtful nature. She had left nothing ambiguous. Her instructions were detailed without being excessive, clear without being strict. It was as if she wanted to ensure that her family felt neither burdened nor confused, only informed and supported. Part of the estate described her long-term financial arrangements, which included several modest investments that had grown steadily over time. There were no dramatic stock surges or unexpected windfalls. Instead, there were slow, predictable increases that aligned with the consistent trajectory of her career. These investments were placed in standard funds, maintained regularly, and reviewed annually with little fanfare. Her family found themselves quietly acknowledging how her patience, once again—
Another section covered her philanthropic commitments. Meryl had always supported various causes, though she rarely discussed them publicly. Her estate reflected this same quiet generosity. There were contributions allocated to organizations she admired, institutions she supported academically, and programs she believed would benefit from long-term stability. None of these donations were excessively large or designed to draw public attention. Instead, they were practical amounts that mirrored her preference for measured impact rather than grand gestures. Her family took note of this and felt a sense of quiet pride. The next portion of the documents addressed personal belongings. This part of the reading took longer, not because the possessions themselves were numerous, but because each item carried sentimental significance. Her estate plan divided them thoughtfully, ensuring that each family member received something that reflected their individual connection to her. Again, nothing about the list was extravagant. The items were meaningful rather than valuable. Journals, letters, personal notes, and items collected from film sets over the years. These small mementos, distributed with such intention, held more emotional weight than the financial sections. As they continued to move through the pages, her family became acutely aware of the consistency that defined Meryl's approach to every aspect of her life. She had built her legacy slowly, deliberately, and without chasing extremes. It was clear that her financial stability had never been a matter of excess, but a natural consequence of long-term dedication and steady effort. The fortune she left behind, while significant, did not feel like a sudden treasure. Instead, it felt like a long, gentle accumulation of time, commitment, and quiet persistence. Her children found themselves reflecting on moments from their upbringing. Quiet dinners, long walks, evenings spent discussing art, history, and the meaning of work. They remembered her talking not about fame or awards, but about preparation, discipline, and staying focused on the craft rather than the attention it brought. They realized that her financial choices mirrored those same lessons. Everything she did was grounded in steadiness. The emotional impact of this realization grew slowly, building not from any dramatic revelation, but from a deep, steady recognition of her life's consistency. They found tears forming not because of the numbers on the pages, but because the documents revealed her in a way they had never fully seen before. Her life had always been public, yet the details of how she managed her private world, so patiently and quietly, felt overwhelmingly personal in this moment. The legal advisor paused occasionally to allow them time to absorb each section. The pauses were long, but not uncomfortable. They served as moments of reflection, giving space for memories to settle in the room. During these pauses, the family exchanged glances, shared subtle nods, and sometimes looked down at the papers with expressions that blended gratitude and nostalgia. Eventually, the discussion shifted toward the practical responsibilities that would follow. There were steps to complete, signatures to provide, and formal processes to initiate. These tasks were described thoroughly, but without urgency.
Everything followed a predictable structure, and the advisor's explanations were calm and precise. Even these instructions seemed to echo Meryl's preference for clarity and order. Her family felt guided, reassured, and supported through the entire process. Then, as they approached the final section of the estate, a quiet stillness filled the room. This part summarized her intentions and expressed her appreciation for her family in the most